Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, well, it is 1:33, so let's get started. Hopefully you're here for the never-ending importance of a story well told. So I'm Kim Pallari with HDR, and I'm a vice president there for strategic communications. I've been in the industry working on transit infrastructure, transportation infrastructure for about 22 years now, working mostly in communications and outreach in that time. So we have a very exciting panel today. You're gonna watch me put my glasses on and off, sorry. So I think really everyone in their life has been struck by or heard a story that really resonated and stayed with you. And that story could have been a story from a relative. It could have been an ad on TV, a Super Bowl commercial, a radio jingle, or it could be a really cool transportation project. And this is about, we're gonna talk about how you do that, how you connect with a very diverse audience, how do you remain authentic, how do you do that in a world where you're planning for the future while you're dealing with today's challenges, getting the attention of audiences? That's what we're gonna talk about today. In our panel, I'm actually gonna let them introduce themselves because this is an amazing panel. They have great experience, a lot of things that we're gonna learn from them today. So I'll just introduce them by name one at a time as they come up and do their presentation. And I actually want you to think about what you're hearing because we'll pause after each presentation and maybe take a few questions, or maybe I might ask a question. So just wanna give you the heads up. I might even call on you if you're extra quiet. So I know it's after lunch, but I want you to be energetic. Okay, so our first speaker is actually Mary Jo Pitzl, and she is a reporter with the Arizona Republic. Mary Jo.
Well, I made the long walk from right next door. You probably saw our building there. I have been at the Arizona Republic for quite some time. I have always been a reporter. I have covered a number of different assignments. Everything from cops, school boards, transportation, which I did for quite some time, including the advent of light rail in Phoenix, which is, I think, why I'm here today. Currently, I am based at our state capitol bureau, and I write a lot about the legislature and public policy and our very attention-getting politics in Arizona. As I said, I've been a Phoenix resident for a long time, came here from Omaha, Nebraska, and never intended to stay. I was going to be a foreign correspondent in a French-speaking country, but here I am. And French doesn't get you real far in Phoenix, although it does bridge you over to Spanish, which is helpful. I live in Central Phoenix, and I like to tell people, if you want a little transit-related story, I do use transit when it works for me. I like to walk, and I live very close to my office, so when I can, I prefer to walk. But one of my favorite stories was one day I was on the bus going up Central Avenue, and some young man was sitting across from me, and I don't know how we got started on a conversation, but he asked me, what I'm doing riding the bus, because I had like the professional, clothing and the briefcase, and I said, well, I like to take the bus, and he says, well, but do you have a car? And I said, yeah. He goes, well, where is it? And I said, it's in my driveway. I mean, I don't need to drive every day. The bus serves my purpose. He was just gobsmacked because he was on the bus because he had lost his driving privileges, and he couldn't imagine that you could do something that people would willingly leave their cars behind. That's changing somewhat in Phoenix, where people are leaving their cars behind, especially as we see more transit-oriented development happening along the rail corridors, but it's still a fairly uncommon practice. But I always love to tell that story that I'm quite content to ride the bus. It's a wonderful way to get some work done while you're traveling. Same thing for light rail.
Awesome, thank you, Mary Jo. And the next panelist is Tara Jones with AECOM.
Hey everybody, my name's Tara Jones. I'm the communications manager with AECOM out of the Atlanta office. It feels like 11 p.m. to me right now, I have to be honest. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm a former broadcast journalist, Emmy Award winning, from Atlanta, Georgia, St. Louis, Missouri, and here and there, everywhere in between, about 6 different networks throughout the country. And once I had my daughter, I decided to hang up my journalism career and open up a production company. And that's where I was able to produce commercials, lots of training videos for Fortune 500 companies, and also began media training for C-suite level executives on how to handle people like me and Mary Jo when they are under the gun and the hot seat to face the media. And from there, I decided I'm one of the strangest people ever. I missed corporate America. And I know. And I went back, and that's where I found my home at AECOM. And transit is something that I never thought I would get into, and I know every single one of you out there are probably like, me neither, because most people don't grow up and be like, I'm gonna be in transit when I get older. But it's really funny because it resonated with me when they said, what's your history with transit? And truly, one of my fondest memories is I'm from right outside of Philadelphia, a small town called Voorhees, New Jersey. And it's, all right, yeah. So I would constantly go into Philadelphia with my grandmother, and we would ride transit, and we would go to Jewelers Row. And we used to call her Diamond Lil because she would just go with her little lute, and she would, loop, and she'd look at all the, diamonds. And I was probably 3 to 7 years old, and I just remember getting on the train and going from place to place to place. And those memories are just so fond for me. And it wasn't until I moved to Florida when I was a little bit older for college that I realized that that wasn't the norm, that people actually drive everywhere. So transit is near and dear to my heart, and I'm just thrilled to be with you guys. I look forward to the presentation to tell you exactly how authenticity and transparency is so important in this industry, and that's why I'm really grateful to be a part of this industry, because I'm able to take that broadcast journalism background and translate it into transportation, and I think it's an area where that really has not been thoroughly vetted. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Welcome, Tara. So before I introduce the last panelist, in our preparation for today, we've had a lot of great conversations, and there's just lots of interlooping of who we are, how we came to be, where we grew up, where we've lived, and it's so fun to listen. I just have a question. How many of you knew you wanted to be in transportation and transit in your early 20s? Okay, pretty decent. I answered an ad in a paper to be a communications project manager, saying, like, the first words out of my mouth in the interview were, I know nothing about transportation or transit. And here I am 22 years later, so obviously a pretty cool industry. All right, our last panelist is Jerome Gray, and he's with Houston Metro, and I have had the pleasure of working directly with Jerome in the past.
Thank you, Kim, and I feel like I'm just going to echo some of the things that Tara just said, because I too am a former broadcast journalist, Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist. I too, well, actually, she's from outside Philadelphia. I'm from Philadelphia. And I too have fond memories of riding the bus growing up in Philadelphia, various places. I'm going to share a little bit more about one of those experiences later in my presentation. But right now, for over the past decade, I've been the Chief Communications Officer for Houston Metro. It's been a wonderful experience for me, going from leading the press operations to then over time gradually taking on other responsibilities, including the marketing, corporate communications, mail services, print services, community engagement. So a lot of fun things to play with, and I'll share some of the great things that we've been able to do at Metro as part of my presentation.
Okay, well, why don't we start with you, Mary Jo?
I too am putting glasses on and off. So I'm here to speak to you as a journalist and talk to you about the importance of telling the full story on anything. And we will have an example here of how that applies to transit. So what message is learned if you know that a young woman plunged a dagger into her heart and died, if you don't understand the tragic romance that led to her demise? And how meaningful is it to know that the U.S. men's hockey team won the gold medal at the 1980 Olympics without realizing why it's called the miracle on ice? These stories are have much more nuance and much more resonance. If you know that Juliet mistakenly thought her lover Romeo was dead and killed herself in despair, and that the 1980 miracle on ice happened when a largely amateur U.S. hockey team defeated the dominant Soviet squad. This is the difference between events and context. It's important to tell the full story, to have a deeper understanding of an issue. And this is true in really about every aspect of life, but it's especially important when it comes to matters of public policy that uses your tax money, that can literally move mountains and otherwise shape the course of history, or at least near-term history. As a journalist, I tell stories every day. Sometimes, due to the pressures of deadline and competition, it's all you can do is to get out the basic who, what, when, where, why, and how of a story. But to give the public a greater and deeper understanding of what's at stake, it's important to examine an issue from all angles, pro, con, indifferent, and to share those observations widely. So I'm going to focus on a transit-oriented example drawn from the annals of contemporary light rail in Phoenix. Let's see where I'm at with my first slide. Yes, so to start off, when Phoenix officials started in the late 1990s to explore expanding bus service and introducing light rail, Phoenix was a growing metropolis with more cars than people, and a bus service that ran Monday through Saturday. Sundays apparently were a day of rest for anybody that wanted to ride the bus. But rail wasn't an inconvenient or an unknown quantity. I'm sorry for the notes here, but rail wasn't a foreign concept in Phoenix, even though it was largely unknown to people because we have a very transient and rapidly growing city. However, there was a street rail system that ran in Phoenix in the first part of the 20th century. There were rail lines downtown. There were rail lines that extended into nearby neighborhoods. In fact, the neighborhood where I live, if the rail were still there, it'd be 2 blocks from my home, which would have been really nice today because now the rail's about a mile from my home. Nonetheless, it works. But rail ended in Phoenix in 1948, sort of overtaken by the push for buses, the whole Goodyear tire history, the combustion engine. So we moved from bus to rail, and those rail tracks were largely all dug up. I believe there might be some monuments to that along 2nd Avenue in Phoenix, or 1st or 2nd Avenue, if you have the time to wander up 2nd Avenue just north of Van Buren. There's some reminders of that early rail concept. But they went away, tracks mostly got dug up, and the idea of rail was just dormant for a half century. We had a couple of starts to try to get more light rail or to get some kind of rail going. We had a big project in the 80s called Valtrans, which was a very ambitious plan that would have brought like more than 100 and some miles of rail to the valley, to the Phoenix area, a lot of it elevated. And that went over not well with the public. Critics said, look, it's too big, all that money, and you're going to build 100 some miles of rail all at once. Well, a couple years later, when Phoenix does get rail going, the criticism was it was too small. So you're always going to have that discussion of, do you start? Is it too big? Is it too small? I mean, you got to start somewhere. But the Valtrans idea was way too ambitious for much of the public, and it was voted down. And that skepticism remained, and it sort of kept everything sort of at bay for at least another decade. In the early 1900s, no, I'm sorry, that's right, when Valtrans failed, its proponents of mass transit said, look, we'll be back. This idea is not going to die. Something will be coming back. And sure enough, 8 years later, we get a scaled back transit plan. Much more scaled back, and it didn't work because, it was too small and before it was too big. Also, there were issues about the cost, and again, the skepticism, like, is anybody going to actually ride this stuff? I mean, it just was, again, a foreign concept to many people who had lived in Phoenix for a while, and people who moved here with their cars from elsewhere. I mean, our population, grew and grew and grew exponentially, especially after World War II, and Phoenix developed as a very car-centric city. In fact, I live about 2 miles from here in an quote-unquote older neighborhood, with all due respect to Philadelphia and what's considered historic there. But my historic house had a garage, and it had a driveway. I mean, it was built for a car, not for horse and buggy carriages. So Phoenix was this very car-centric construction of the city, also fueled a lot of that skepticism. So in 1990s, another transit effort, it didn't work, but never say die. Finally, in 2000, we get what was called Proposition 2000, aptly named after the start of the new millennium. And this one passed. It passed with a 65% of the vote, which is quite a contrast to the one that had failed about a decade or 8 years earlier, where it failed by like 100-some votes. So this one grew, it had much more public support. There was a lot more marketing, which I think Tara will be talking about, a lot more discussion about what it would be. And the mayor at the time, Mayor Skip Rimza, had this idea that, okay, if people don't trust that this is actually going to happen and they're not sure where it's going, he said, put the map on the ballot. And they actually did. They put the map of where the light rail was going to run and where the bus routes would be on the ballot. That helped to get it over the hump. And as the headline from that night shows, it was a big victory. The proponents broke into song singing, "I've been working on the railroad." That's been sort of an iconic moment in Phoenix transit history. And I must admit, as construction started a couple years later on the light rail, I remember as a reporter, getting a phone call from a reader, and she wanted to know, well, wait a minute, what's this? This train's going up Central Avenue? I didn't know that. And I asked her if she had voted, and she had, she said. And I said, well, it was on your ballot. I mean, there was a picture of the map on your ballot. But, it'd been a while. It'd been about 1.5 years, 2 years before construction really started. And obviously, she didn't carry that idea forward. But this was, the successful plan was a 20-mile line that went from a little bit northwest side of Phoenix down through Tempe and over close to the Mesa, to the border with Mesa. This was intended as a starter line. It opened in 2008 and has expanded since. There have been a couple of successful expansions, not without controversy, because rail does remain a hot button topic. Let's see. So that brings us to, despite the successful extensions, the Phoenix area is looking now to extend another tax to carry forward transit and road projects for another 20 years. This is a tax that was started in 1980 under the banner of Build the Damn Freeways. It was all freeway-centric. Over every 20 years, it's renewed, and it's picked up more transit elements. So the current proposal includes a lot of light rail expansion. Well, that ran into an absolute dead stop at our state legislature. Lawmakers, mostly all Republicans, said, we don't want rail. We're not going to support any funding to expand light rail. And the legislature had a say in this because the legislature had to authorize the ability to have a transit election. So they used that leverage. They put a hold, a stop to any light rail expansion, included some money for rail maintenance, for maintaining what we have, and said, look, if cities want to expand rail, then they can do that themselves. And ultimately, the plan got through, but not without axing or perhaps realigning a rail loop that has been planned to go around our state capitol. They found it offensive that the city and the region would try to bring light rail around the capitol. I think it's because they felt it would block access to their parking areas, but nobody's really confessed to that. Nonetheless, the transit tax is going to the ballot. Voters will decide that next November, and we'll see how this fares. But I tell you this because it's important to understand the history of rail. We've had rail in Phoenix. We got rid of it. We tried to bring it back. We tried. It happened, and then it happened. It's been embraced by people. Ridership, like many other places, dropped significantly during the pandemic. It's building back up, and proponents of rail like to point to the Super Bowl earlier this year, the World Series, which just finished, for how important rail has been for moving big numbers of people into one specific area. So understanding that, we'll see how much that story, the history of Phoenix and transit and rail resonates, and how much it is told over the coming year as proponents work towards the 2024 ballot measure. But it is important to keep in mind the history of things, that things are usually not viewed just in isolation, although that's very easy to do when you're looking at an item on the ballot, unless someone's telling you the larger story. Thank you.
Is that on? It is on. Sorry. I'm pretty loud. They usually don't give me a mic. Before I see if any of you have a question, I actually am going to be selfish as the moderator and ask a question that I think I can learn from. When you're developing a story and you're looking at the facts and you're building that storyline, when you reach out to public entities or agency representatives, what can you tell us about how we can do a better job answering you and giving you the information so that the messaging as an agency that we want out there is out there, but it also is authentic and meets the needs of you as the reporter and the voice?
Sure. A couple of things. Respond. Return phone calls or emails. Be mindful of deadlines, although it is always important. It's incumbent on the journalist to let you know what their deadlines are. Try to think a little out of the box. I mean, sometimes on deadline, you just have a very immediate need. How many miles is this? How much is this going to cost? And answer that. But, if that might be an opportunity to say, can we give you a fuller picture? Could we sit down and maybe have a longer discussion on this when deadline isn't so pressing? That's helpful. And then be open to pushback and criticism. I mean, there are many dimensions to a story, as we learned from this region's struggle with the legislature to get authorization for a transit election. I mean, there are very strong feelings that among many of our lawmakers that light rail and even transit are not a good investment, that this money really should all be going into roads, and we're still building roads, we're still expanding. So be open to pushback and maybe be prepared to have a way to counter those critics.
That's great. Thank you. Do I see anyone have any questions? There's a microphone up here. You can walk up and ask. I see someone coming. Awesome. See, we're not asleep after lunch.
Hi, Amanda Vandergriff with InfraStrategies. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I really want to hear a little more about how we work with our state legislative partners to make the case for transit, because that is often the biggest barrier for many cities as they're looking to go to the ballot again for increased authorization. And I guess that's another question too. A lot of those ballots, or a lot of the requirements at the state level are so restrictive on what you can put as a question. So you couldn't even put a map. Is there going to be a map this time here in Phoenix? And have you seen any kind of additional restrictions added this time around by the state legislature?
So this is focusing on the Phoenix or the regional effort to expand, to get another round of funding for transit expansion and roads. How do you talk to lawmakers? Well, you show them, but perhaps it's best to show them what their constituents think. If there's anything that transit agencies have, it's data. Who's the riders? Where are they coming from? What is this doing? There is an air pollution, air quality factor that needs to be looked at because this region is at risk of exceeding ozone standards, which can lead to a lot of big penalties from the federal government. So helping them to understand the consequences of basically halting any kind of transit expansion. I'm not aware of if anybody's going to put a picture on the ballot. I don't know that that's been decided. And there aren't going to be any more restrictions than what the legislature approved back in June when they finally allowed this to go forward. Again, this is just permission. The legislature had to give permission so Maricopa County could go ask its voters, should we have a transit tax? There's a little history on that. Maricopa County is the only one of the 15 counties in Arizona that has to get legislative blessing to do a transit election. Everybody else, if their board of supervisors wants a transit tax, then they put it out there on their own. But about 2 decades ago, there was a lawmaker who really thought that transit was mostly for handicapped people and didn't believe in expansion. And he put in this requirement that in Maricopa County, if you want to expand transit, you got to come through the legislature. And that is not a train track that goes through the legislature. That is an asphalt covered road. And that is where, a lot of their loyalties lie. I mean, again, a lot of the lawmakers represent the burgeoning urban area and the exurbs and where car is king. So talking to them, you've got to find allies. You've got to find somebody who's sympathetic. And I'd start by working with some of the members of the Transportation Committee. The Transportation Committee in the House is a little more open to this than the Senate. Senate's been pretty hostile to this. But they're really in a position now where they're not going to change anything. They'll probably campaign and lobby against it, which is certainly part of the debate.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to Tara and hear more about storytelling and authenticity.
Yeah, so I get the part that's not so much fun, and that is what happens when the voters will approve a sales tax, but then the project changes. And that is really difficult. So how can the story save your project? So instead of just telling you guys what I think, I wanted to give you a tangible checklist so that if this happens within your organization, you are able to go through these steps to determine exactly what your new story will be. First, you have to identify what has changed. Is it the leadership? Is it political factors? Budget, funding, community opposition? Maybe it's even a good thing. We always think of bad things, but maybe it's new community benefits. We were speaking earlier, and I forgot the most common one, COVID. So know what has changed and be transparent and real about what has changed, because the public is not stupid. They are going to know exactly what their issue is and what problem they're facing with whatever project you're presenting. So knowing the opposition, knowing what the kickback is going to be, like Mary Jo was just speaking about, be open to opposition. She was speaking about legislators. Yourself being in whatever position you are in within the transit agency, be open to opposition. So how do you determine your new story? This is where you have to figure out, how is the rider, the stakeholder, affected? Is it good? Is it bad? Is the community being affected? What are all of the potential oppositions that you are going to face marketing this project? This is where we get into our public engagement. And these are the topics that the media loves to grab a hold of and loves to run story after story after story. I know because I did it. Sorry. And then is there anything that the general public is not privy to that maybe is a misconception that you all can clear up? And these are things like maybe reallocation of funds, where they go, oh, well, now you're not going to do this because you're taking all the money over here. Well, how is that money benefiting the project over here? Maybe it's a misconception. Maybe there's something that you can tell them to show the benefits of the project, because ultimately these projects are beneficial. So we want to show them how we are trying to benefit them as the stakeholder and as the community. So now it's constructing your authentic story. I underlined authentic because it's such a hot button word right now, but I have to tell you it's my most favorite word in the entire English language because I think it's the most important word. Authenticity, especially for the generation coming up, is the most important thing you can possibly do. Gen Z is all about authenticity, and they are your new riders because they are now in their 20s. So you really have to be authentic with them. You cannot fool them in any way, shape, or form. Not with your marketing, not with your messaging, not with your branding. They're too smart. They didn't like all of the fluff that you saw in marketing decades ago. So the power of effective marketing should not be ignored. And you might say, okay, yeah, that's groundbreaking information. But really what I want to stress to you is that a lot of agencies don't stress the importance of communication and marketing. They just feel like, we'll just do that when we need it. That's not how marketing works. And Jerome is going to speak more to that, talking about the consistency of marketing, especially when a story changes, because then you have to educate the public. They don't know. And the public is not dealing with this 40 hours a week like you are. They are going about their lives, and they don't understand how the story has changed. Mary Jo said, there was a map? There was a map on the ballot? I didn't see a map on the ballot. That's a perfect example of someone living their life and going to the ballot and voting and not knowing specifically what they were even voting for until they saw construction. The power of authenticity should not be ignored. I think I've driven home that point. You have to make sure that whatever messaging and branding that you're presenting to the public is in fact authentic and truthful. If not, the public will let you know that you are not authentic and truthful. Which goes right along with don't underestimate the power of your viewer. They're discerning. And when I do public engagement and we have these public meetings, some of the questions are not elementary questions. They have researched this. They are going to know exactly which route is going to come through their neighborhood or their business. And you better have a good answer for them as to why they're going to lose their home or their business to a transit project. Those are really difficult conversations to have, and that is why you have to be authentic. You have to let them know what the purpose of this project is. And it's very difficult sometimes to look someone in the eye and tell them that they're going to potentially lose their business if Plan C is adopted. Connect with emotion. If you say to them, well, yeah, I mean, Plan C is coming through your business, sorry. They're really not going to be happy with you. But when you're able to talk to them and empathize with them and understand how difficult a decision that will be if that is the chosen route based on the data, you can let them know with emotion, we understand your concerns. At the end of the day, guys, we're all human beings. And we had a couple that came to every single one of our meetings for Clifton Corridor, which is in Atlanta. MARTA was expanding. There were 6 different options mapped out, and everyone except one took their business. And they came every single meeting, and they just asked, how's it looking? How's the data? They were such an integral part. They could have been the project manager by the end of it, because they wanted to know exactly what this project entailed, what we were looking at, what was the data, how were we going to determine which route was going to be used? And at the end of it, they couldn't have been nicer because we were transparent and we were honest with them. And of course, as the consultant, that was our advice to MARTA as well. You have to be transparent and you have to let them know because it's gonna happen. So as long as you're telling them exactly why it's happening, it softens the blow. Speak in a way that your audience will hear you. When I first got into transportation, you guys, the amount of acronyms that you all use was mind-boggling. I went through my first, 2 weeks at AECOM, and I was like, every meeting I left, I don't know what they said. Like, I have no clue what I'm doing. I felt so far in over my head. And the best piece of advice that my hiring manager gave to me was, sure, learn it, but don't speak it. Because I want you to remain a layman. Because if you don't understand what we're saying, the public's not gonna understand what you're saying. So I have made that a concerted effort to make sure that whenever somebody says something to me in 20 acronyms in one sentence, pause, let's break that down. So keep that in mind when you're speaking to the general public, that they are not gonna understand the acronyms and the verbiage that you all use on the daily. Be relatable. So the next thing that I wanna show you guys, so this is the example that is really gonna bring this home. So November 4th, 2014, the voters of Clayton County approved a 1 penny sales tax to bring MARTA into Clayton County. They voted what they thought was for light rail. Fast forward to 2022, it became very apparent due to decrease in ridership, COVID, other factors, light rail was no longer an option. They were getting bus rapid transit. That went over like a lead balloon. These voters felt duped. They were upset. They felt as if they had been lied to. The public officials, from county commissioners to the mayor, they were all on the hot seat. And there was MARTA who had to explain it. So Adam Shoemaker, who is in charge of all of the video at MARTA and does a remarkable job with their channel. If you've never been to MARTA's YouTube channel, highly suggest that you check it out because he's just a creative. He used to be a photojournalist with CNN, so he takes all of that experience and brings it to MARTA. So what they did was they called up Carrie Black from Indigo in Indianapolis, and they said, we need to ride BRT in your city. We're gonna bring all of the public officials up. And we want to show them exactly what this looks like because now we have to re-educate an entire county who feels like they've been duped because they paid this penny sales tax for 9 years and now they're not getting what they feel that they have paid for. So I'm gonna show you this video and you can see it, in my opinion, was highly effective.
Indianapolis, riding on the Red Line BRT. We brought the leadership from Clayton County, brought a lot of the elected officials.
We came with a purpose, and that purpose is for us to have a better understanding of how BRT could really look and how it can serve our community. You don't always have to recreate the wheel. And what Indigo has done was created a framework that could easily port into any municipality.
It's not just a bus system, it's electric buses that keeps moving through traffic. And I think seeing it is believing it. Economic development, it brings a lot of things that I've seen today that people were telling me that couldn't be done, is being done here in Indianapolis.
So the one feature that will port exceptionally well into Forest Park is the designated lanes.
It actually flows with traffic, so there's no disruption. The bus keeps moving.
Reading about it is totally different than actually seeing it.
The stations that we've seen with bus rapid transit, it's really a transformative stop. It has a different look. It's like riding a light rail train.
It is absolutely a rapid transit system that just happens to be on a bus. but it works as efficiently as a MARTA train would work. Most importantly, though, we have learned that it does indeed spur economic development and revitalization to communities.
This particular node, which is a historic district, a lot of downtown shops, and to see how the transit system interfaces and helps with the infrastructure out here. And the only thing you have to do is get on the bus and get off the bus.
Behind me, I have a fresh line, and I have a mixed-use community right here on the bus line. These are the type of things that we're looking for so we can be innovative and move Clayton County forward.
It has given us an opportunity to see firsthand the type of development that grows around transit. This is exactly the type of development we want to see in Clayton County.
We're standing out front of Goodwill. They've partnered up with a private sector manufacturing company. They said they would not be here if it was not for BRT. And especially from a Chamber of Commerce standpoint, how it helps to recruit companies to the area. New hospital, new grocery stores for these residents in a blighted community that likely have not seen this type of growth in years.
Before coming, I was a little apprehensive about the whole idea of BRT and not rail. But since being here, I have found out the way to go now is BRT.
Looking at their BRT and their rapid bus transit system has just really inspired me to bring this back to you, Clayton County.
We've learned a lot about policy, about operations, about cost, about planning. I think this was beneficial to all.
This BRT system looks like it's going to be a great fit for Clayton County.
We are going to do this in Clayton County with the help of MARTA and every elected official and our citizens.
How effective is that? So literally think about getting every single elected official from a county, getting them on camera saying, oh, this is the best. This is what we're going to do. We're going to bring this back to Clayton County. This is perfect for you guys. They were mainly in opposition of BRT prior to going up and seeing it for themselves. So this was an educational project that obviously turned into a marketing and didn't turn into that. Obviously, Adam knew that, and all of us behind the scenes knew what marketing project this was. But how powerful to show that this is what BRT is. It's not a bus that's going to be stuck in traffic. These are dedicated lanes. It runs like light rail. And suddenly, the media calmed down, because the headlines were not favorable prior to this educational marketing platform. So it's a great transition into what Jerome is going to be speaking about, where education and consistency of message is so important. Thank you.
Tara, you said a couple things that really resonated that I've experienced in doing communications and outreach across the country on transit projects for a lot of different agencies. I find myself often trying to convince our audience of clients or team members that the public is savvy. They may not know yet, but it just takes some education to inform them. Just like I didn't know anything about transportation when I interviewed all those years ago. I had to learn. And I think that's a big thing that we internally have to educate about, which is that they do understand if you just give them the right information in the right way so that it resonates, then they can make an informed decision. And I think that's really important. We were talking earlier about proof of purpose, because in our world, if we do our job right, we manage that controversy and keep it maybe not 100% down, but low, and we often get questioned why the need to do so much of the work that we do after the fact, because there was no controversy. Why were we wasting so much concern and time out there educating and informing? And that proof of purpose, I mean, usually that's when we say, well, thank you, that means we did our job right. So I think as you guys are thinking about the work that you do, I'm curious, do you feel like you're having to prove the importance of marketing and communications, any of you in the audience? Have you experienced that before? Okay, so I don't think I see anything, hands. So Tara, do you have an example, or how do you get your teams over that hump if they're skeptical about a marketing campaign, the need for it? You mentioned, oh, we'll do that only when we need it, not as a consistent theme. So do you have any proofs or proven tactics or lessons you've learned that you can share and impart on us?
So I'm a huge proponent of video, and we do have metrics that show engagement rises substantially when video is used. And whether that video is on social media, websites, through email campaigns, even texting campaigns that have a link that can lead them to it, we need to stop thinking about traditional marketing and traditional media because it's gone. The days of running an ad in the paper, no disrespect, for public meetings is really gone. Now, we still do that to make sure that we're checking a box and to make sure that we are reaching some very rural areas that we have in Georgia and throughout the Southeast, but that's a very small segment of the population that we're talking about. We are now dealing with very much media-savvy individuals and stakeholders, and again, they're younger, and Gen Z is now in their 20s. These are people who are voting, and they're understanding, and they want to be engaged. And it has to be fast, and it has to be informative, and it has to be entertaining. Because I think transportation, again, no offense, it can be boring. I mean, let's be real, it can be boring. But when you make it engaging and you let them understand why it's important to them, then that's where you really start to see engagement. So I know that's a long-winded answer to your question, but for me, whenever I get pushback, I'm always trying to go for video. At least let me do video for you, because it can be evergreen, meaning you can use it forever. And a way to do that, quick tip, if you do video, this video that I just showed you is not evergreen, because those public officials are not going to be in office some of them, I'm not going to jinx anybody, but today, I'm like, I don't know where I am. So today is election day, and some of them are up for re-election. So that's not an evergreen story. It's impactful when it was, but it has a shelf life. Evergreen is getting community members who are going to talk about how fantastic this project was and how thankful and grateful they are, and getting video, which is called B-roll, of a community, a project that's happening. That stuff that you can store. It's a one-time expense, and you can re-edit it a million different ways so that you can break it down into a small little segment and put it on social. You can have an educational platform and have that on your website. I just find that when you use video and you're able to talk to people, it just comes across so much more effective, and we find that our engagement is higher. So the metrics don't lie, so that's how I get people to say yes. Not always, but I try every time.
Okay, let's go to Jerome to finish up this story of how to tell a good story in a creative way that takes you completely out of what the real tangible thing was and really resonated with your audience. I love your story.
Is that what I'm doing?
Yes,
No, I'm kidding.
It's amazing. You guys wait.
Well, once again, I'm really excited to be able to be here and share with you what I like to refer to as communications metro style. And thank you all for having this event here in Phoenix, because it gave me the opportunity to come and visit my son, who's a college student at Arizona State University. And he actually took a break from studying for the LSAT to be here today. So Chaser, you'll just wave your hand. I know you don't want to, but I'm really excited that he would decide to spend time to listen to his dad. He really must have wanted to get away from that studying, don't you think? Anyway, there are a couple of major things that I want to leave you with, and I'm going to start right off the bat, in terms of really making sure that you all are strategizing about how best to tell the story around what are often complicated or extensive changes, right? You got to really think about your strategy about how to do that, what you want to do. And then secondly, bringing that team together, the transit planners, the operational teams, the communicators, to figure out What are the key talking points and what are the key touch points? How do we want to make sure that we have the right message to be delivered in the right places to reach the various audiences, right? Those two things are very, very key for me in being able to effectively tell your story. And lastly, make sure that you're focused on always focusing on those key elements over and over again and sharing it over and over again. It may seem like a broken record to you, but don't forget there's someone out there who's not going to be familiar with it, who needs to hear it, or who needs to be reminded about it. So those are key things. And in the category of transit people love their acronyms, I want to talk to you a little bit about the before and after of NBN. NBN, one of those transit acronyms that only, I see you, Laura. There's probably only one or two people in this room who know what the heck he's talking about with this acronym. And in a room full of transit professionals, you've heard them all. You've heard all the acronyms. Well, this particular NBN is the new bus network, Metro's new bus network. And this was launched in 2015. And it was important for us to be able to communicate in a way. This is a clean slate, changing our local bus system from scratch overnight. You're going to go one day and get on the bus here, and the next day it's going to be a different stop. It was an overnight effort, and wow, how scared were we about what people were going to say and what they were going to encounter when they went out there to take the bus. And so that meant that we wanted to get ahead of this early, focusing on key elements and telling people long before we flip the switch, focusing on more service, better service, your service. Key strategic elements that tie directly into what the transit planners had created for us. The more service was important. There were various pieces of collateral that spoke to that, that talked about we're going from not just service Monday through Friday and scattering on Saturday and Sunday, we're going to 7-day service, and being able to sell that and tell why that was important. The better service, being able to share and show, you don't have to come downtown anymore to transfer, to go back outside. We're going to have a grid system. The lines are going to be straightened out much better. Connections are going to be better. It was going to provide better service for you. And let's never forget, it is your service. It's your service because we had all these meetings out in the community to figure out what do you want to see in that new bus network and how we could go about putting together. So these were the key elements of this communication and how we really stressed it in a way that people could understand and accept. And it was a way for us to then arm the people who needed to have this information to talk about it. Talking points focused on these areas to board members, executives at the agency, frontline employees, communication sessions with frontline employees to tell them what this was going to look like and how you should be able to tell the passenger who gets on the bus, hand a pamphlet to them so that they know what's coming. It was important to be able to have that kind of engagement so, it wasn't one person sharing this, it was many people sharing the message about what we're going to be doing. And we also relied on something that the agency had never done before, which is we call them street teams. And there was a series of part-time workers who were hired just for the launch of this bus service to be able to go out to transit centers, bus stops, and other locations to have that one-on-one connection to help people understand what was coming, what we were doing. And then after we did it, continue to be out there to help them guide their way and get the information they needed to do. That became so successful. This was launched in 2015. It was very successful, and we had lots of communication surrounding it, and partners reached out to us, colleagues reached out to us to learn what we did, and we were happy to share, much like you're doing in this room today. So that became the basis in many ways for what I'm going to lean into and talking about next. And I will move on to the next slide, which is a regional transit plan, right? This was big. This was huge for Houston because there had been this back and forth over transit and what we're going to be doing. In Metro Solutions in 2003, I had the pleasure of being a reporter at that time, covering and watching as this was being unfolded. I didn't work at Metro, but I sure felt for them. I really did. I felt how awful, what do you mean you don't want to expand your transit? Well, yes, there were political headwinds, community critics all coming at it because God knows we don't need rail. We're a car-centric community in Houston. We don't need that. Don't bring that here. You can spend your money otherwise. It was a $640 million referendum, bond referendum, to be able to expand the system, rail as well as bus service, and it passed. 52%. I think it was like just close to 52%. That made up, but it did pass. And Metro quickly went to work doing what it needed to do to expand the system, building out 2 new light rail lines, an extension of our Main Street rail line, and of course all the bus service and park and ride service that was proposed in this measure, and we went forward and did it. Fast forward to 2019, and Metro's next big chance to push a transit expansion, a referendum, and that was the Metro Moving Forward plan that garnered 70% voter approval. And get this, the 2003 measure was for $640 million bonding authority. This was for $3.5 billion bonding authority. A lot had changed over the times, right? The political landscape had changed. A number of people, I love this, a number of people moving to Houston who are used to robust transit systems saying, where's my bus? I want my bus. Ah, good. We like those voters coming to town so that they can help move transit forward. So very happy that that occurred. And also what occurred is the exchange with colleagues across the country. What did you do that worked? How did you come up with this? How did you tweak your system to make sure they connect and people would understand what you're doing? Because there's a great deal, as you all know, a great deal of education that goes into putting forward a transit plan. And notice that this was the Moving Forward plan, Metro Next Moving Forward plan. And I say that because we really didn't, in my mind, so forgive me for those of you transit purists in here, in my mind, we weren't going to the voters to ask them to pass a transit referendum. We were going to ask them to approve pass a travel improvement plan with the idea that whether you ride or drive, this is going to benefit you because this particular plan has 500 miles of travel improvements. And I'll never forget sitting with the planners one day trying to figure out, and they laid out the numbers and we were going over the numbers and what they wanted to do, and you know, it was like, oh, 2.3 miles of this and 1.4 miles of that, and you know how they do that transit talk, right? And all the minutia related to what they were doing. And I truly am a layman. I'm not a transit person. But what I heard was, oh, wait a minute. Okay, so if I do the math, this is close. This is like 500 miles. Let's wrap it up. Let's push that. It's 500 miles of travel improvement. It's 75 miles of bus rapid transit. 21 new park and ride and transit centers, 16 miles of light rail, including one line to the airport, one of the airports, 110 miles of two-way HOV lane. I heard that HOV lane piece of it. I was like, ooh, okay, those drivers out there, they're really going to love this. They're going to be voting for this. They may not be so crazy about that rail, but they're going to love, you know, so we need to make sure that we're selling and pushing the fact that there are going to be 110 miles of two-way HOV lanes and then another 290 miles of improvements to our bus service. See how we did that? 290 miles of improvement to the bus service, but overall it's 500 miles of travel improvement. The other key thing for us in telling this story was the fact that we're growing regions. It's happening all across the country. Various places are growing. And so ours was about a plan for the future, developing a plan for the future. We did the math, and I figured out, I was sharing with the folks earlier today, and doing the math, we were going from 7 million people in our region to about 10 million people in the region by the year 2040. And so I went and looked at some numbers and realized that's the equivalent of the cities of San Antonio, Austin, Corpus Christi, Arlington, and I'm still leaving a city out. I don't remember which one. But all those folks moving into Houston. Take that visual, you know, especially if you've been on the San Antonio Riverwalk and you know how crowded it can get there. And so these were key elements that we wanted to put to make folks understand and realize that this is going to improve travel for everyone, whether you ride or drive Metro. And again, the referendum successfully passed with 70% approval. Now, one of the other key things that I like to share is the importance of owning your story. As a former journalist, I am never going to expect Mary Jo or any other journalist to do my job. I'm going to hope to share good stories and any information. We're very open and transparent. And Mary Jo, I like when you said respond quickly. We really believe you need to respond quickly to reporters and be transparent. Never hide, never lie. Simple as that. It's important, though, that you do what you can to own your own story. And so we do that through various means. Our Metro Connections e-newsletter with, I think it's about pushing close to 40,000 subscribers now. A Metro Matters TV show that is on access channels, a couple of access channels, a podcast, of course, social media. We've expanded the social media team tremendously since I've been at Metro. When I first came there, we had one media specialist handling the job of responding to reporters and also posting on our social media channels. We now have a dedicated team of 3 social media specialists and 4 media specialists who focus on dealing with regular reporter matters. And Inside Track employee newsletter, using that as a way to make sure your colleagues are staying informed about what we're doing inside the agency and outside the agency, because they are ambassadors as well. So those is very key. No matter where you are, what your resources are, you do what you can to own your own story and use your platforms to tell that story. So I think it's very important to do that. One of the things that I'm really excited to share with you all today is one of the spots we heard talk about rail being flipped to BRT and what that was like. Well, in Houston, interestingly enough, when we had our referendum, it was clear that a number of people in Houston wanted rail, but we were putting up a referendum that was going to be heavier on bus rapid transit. And I was like, oh my God, what are we doing here? We've been talking, we had that fight in 2003 about rail, and now we're going with bus rapid transit. And so one of the things that the team was very interested in doing was making sure we focused and shared how that bus rapid transit service is just like or can be close to rail. And so what I want to do is share the commercial that the team came up with. This is the latest version. There have been several versions of this commercial that started as an animation before the referendum as we were sharing, telling what was coming, to then when we finally were able to open up our first BRT line, which was not part of the referendum. We were already in construction for a bus rapid transit line before our referendum, and then that line opened during the pandemic, but these spots did not start until after. Take a look.
We could start by telling you how sleek it is, how it's at the edge of innovation in its industry, that it makes connections faster and more convenient. We could promote the fact that even traffic signals give it the green light, and that it moves so quickly we had to give it its own lane. Or you could just ride. Discover where this rail-like ride is going next. Visit ridemetro.org/Metro Next.
So I'm very happy and proud of that spot. Our team was able to pick up a few awards for their creativity on that, so that's really cool. The next thing that I think is very important for you all to know and keep in mind, why does what we do matter? Why does it matter wherever you are, whatever you're pushing, being able to communicate and share with the public why it matters? And so coming out of the pandemic, we had a series of spots that we ran, focusing on the services that we provided during the pandemic, getting our medical center employees to their jobs and other frontline employees to their jobs, and then reminding people, once again, reminding them some of the things that we did before the pandemic, so you don't forget about Metro, especially since we were coming in a year where there was going to be a mayoral race in the elections today, and so we'll see what happens, but I personally was so worried. I didn't want our transit agency to become one of the issues for any of the mayoral candidates. So we were out early focusing on sharing the story about why Metro matters.
Metro is here for you every day, providing safe, reliable travel options. We take you to celebrations and help during emergencies. We're always listening to the community, and we manage taxpayer dollars responsibly. And thanks to overwhelming voter approval, we're building transit for today and tomorrow so that you can drive less and do more.
Again, pulling back some of the elements and things that have happened over the past. During Hurricane Harvey, Metro stepped up big time and did a lot. It's important to remind folks, you know, we're there for you, not just for travel, but for emergencies. We're very big when the rodeo comes to town, or big concerts, in getting people. So that spot was designed to remind people of that. The next two spots I'm going to share with you, I think it's really important if you have transit advocates in your community, make sure they are heard. Make sure that people hear them. We do it in a number of ways on our social media platforms, targeting particular folks who can tell the story of transit and what they do. There's a council member who has something called Car Free Fridays, where she encourages her team to make sure, and she does it too, any meetings that they're going to on a Friday, they're not using their cars to get there. They're using public transit, they're using bicycles, they're walking. And so it's important to use those advocates to tell the story. The next couple of spots I'm going to share with you, they're very important and kind of personal for me because I wrote both of them, and I wanted to do them because it's with the mayor of Houston. And I grew up, as you know, in Philadelphia, and I took 3 buses to get to high school, something I don't think my son even knows. But I took 3 buses to get to high school to be able to get to my opportunity. And so finding out about this man's story was ripe for the pickings for us to be able to share his story.
Long before I became mayor of Houston, I relied on public transit to put me on the road to opportunity. As a child and even as a college student at the University of Houston, the Route 44 acres home of the Fofo was a lifeline for my family. I know firsthand what it means to have a transit system that makes life better for us all. Discover how you can drive less and do more with Metro.
And then we can keep the lights down. I'll go straight into the next spot that, again, allows a high-profile person tell the story of what Metro is doing.
As mayor of Houston, when it comes to transportation, I often speak about the need for a paradigm shift. In 2019, voters approved the Metro Next plan for 500 miles of travel improvements. Metro is making progress on many of these transit projects that focus on making it better to move around our region. Learn more about this progress and how you can drive less and do more with Metro.
And so you see there in that spot something that we were talking back in 2018, right? The 500 miles of travel improvement. Here in 2023, we're having the mayor share that we're working on delivering on that referendum in 2019 and delivering those travel improvements. So to the extent that you have those advocates out there, it is important to engage and be able to help them or get them to help tell your story. Wrapping up, keep it simple. You know, we're bombarded with information over and over again, and there's so much to take in. But keep it simple, make it connect, and make sure you're sharing the story over and over again. Thank you.
Okay, I know somebody out there has a question. Yep, there you go.
Thank you all for your comments. I'd be interested in your advice on COVID and how the transit systems should be responding to that in a transparent, authentic way. It's a rough issue. People understand what it means in terms of how many times they're going to work in their old offices and how many times they're not anymore. And a lot of the basics have changed. And so I'd be interested in your advice on how people should be addressing
So I stick by with what I said before. Be transparent. Never hide it. Never lie about it. And I think as it relates to COVID, a couple of things. You know, that had all of us scratching our head trying to figure out what to do, right? We are fortunate in that we had a win in that 1/3 of the medical center employees in our big, huge medical center relied on public transit. So that was a major hook to be able to say, transit ain't going away. We got to continue to be able to get those folks there. What we've done since is only bringing back service where we know there is a demand and we're transparent about it. Right now, our local bus service is coming back to, I think it's about 87%. Our park and ride, the suburban commute, it's not. It's about 35%. So we're tweaking and changing how we do that, and we share that. We share that with our riders and letting them know, you know, given the fact that you all aren't riding downtown on Mondays or Fridays the way you used to, we've cut the service back on those days. So be open, be transparent. I don't think it means that we put the brakes on anything that we're doing to try to improve transit, right? Because the one thing that I believe as we go forward and we get beyond this, and as we continue to grow, these communities grow, we're still going to need it. We may be in a window of time right now where the ridership is not where we'd want it to be, but that doesn't mean in 10, 15, 20 years, we're not going to find ourselves in a place where we need to be ready to accommodate the folks who are going to be coming and using it. But at the end of the day, and the bottom line, all of us, I believe, you got to be transparent about what's happening. There's no reason to hide it, because the moment you do, Mary Jo is coming after you, okay?
And that's what I was going to transition into, is that this is an educational opportunity. They don't understand that the bus service or light rail is based off of ridership. So if you can inform them and let them know that this is how it works, we're not picking and choosing where bus routes are getting cut or added. The ridership is simply not there. And to Jerome's point, if they understand that and you're transparent about it, that always helps to soften the blow when the public is being educated, because then they feel like they're not being duped. And I was going to say, make sure you're telling them as the transit agency, or they are going to tell it for you in a way that perhaps you did not want them to. So if you're not saying anything, they're going to say something. So make sure your branding and your messaging, more so messaging than branding when we're talking about COVID, is on track and is consistent, and that everyone within your agency is on the same page with that messaging.
We always say the game's being played whether you're in it or not, right? So it's happening. You got to get in it. So any other questions? Yes, come on up. I think when you say transparency and authenticity, what I think about is don't be tone deaf. Focus on what's happening in that neighborhood, in that community, and then bring your relatable story. And I think in the Bay Area, on the large program that I'm working on, which is a new rail crossing of the Bay in Northern California, I mean, we're working with the agency to not just plan for the future and for generations, but we're actually talking to the community first about the harms of the past and how to improve upon and repair those harms while we're actually planning for the future. And we needed to do that to be authentic and to not be tone deaf. And it's part of the equitable idea of engaging and growing as a community together.
You have to do it. In fact, we have a spot that's running right now, and it's important to run it because as we're building, or moving forward on a 25-mile bus rapid transit project, there were a couple of areas where there was some pushback. People were like, oh, wait a minute. In one area in particular in the east end of town, we were going with an overpass, and the folks in the area were against it. They didn't want it. They wanted to do an underpass. Well, Metro had experienced that before with a rail line where we were going to go over, but the folks wanted to go under. We said we'd go under, only to find out as we got into it, we couldn't go under. And then that became very awful for the agency because you said you were going to do it. Well, no, it's too contaminated, too expensive. We can't do it. We got to go over. So this time we find ourselves doing that. But what we did, we messaged and shared. You know, we've been out there listening to the audience, and y'all said you wanted this, so we're going to try to do it. So there's a spot right now that talks about the fact that in one particular area of this route, they wanted some changes where the route would be located. We listened, we tweaked that. One area they wanted more traffic signals. We listened, we tweaked that, and then at the end, the east end, the underover, we put that together to let the public know we're being transparent. We heard you, we're trying to make these changes.
And I think a good piggyback on that is it's communication. They want to feel like they're being heard. And if we're having a discussion and I'm just talking over you, you're going to feel a certain way about me. And don't think that your organization or your agency is any different. Make sure that public engagement portion is effective and it's effectively communicating and that you're hearing what the pushback and what the opposition is and that you're addressing it. Because if they feel heard, they calm down, as does the media.
Come on up. Thank you for being patient.
Thank you so much. This has been super helpful in the work I do. So my communications work, it isn't like a broad transportation. It's very specific in open streets event, Portland Sunday Parkways, if anyone knows it. So when I first started like a year and a half ago, one of the first things I noticed was that they didn't have an authentic voice and there wasn't really any owning of the story/mission for the program. So I'm just curious, do you have like tips or techniques on how to do that in very effective ways, especially social media? Social media is like a huge place that I'm trying to grow the program. Thank you.
Well, I do think once again, it's about getting the key stakeholders in a room and you all figuring out what is most important to convey. What's most important about this? And then make sure you have a communications person in there who can hear, okay, I just heard you want to, Laura, I just flashed back to one of our colleagues at Metro wanting to call one of our services, or one of the things they were doing, FLOP, and there's a technical reason. He didn't want to call it that. No, let me back up. He didn't want to call it that. That would have been the acronym for what he was proposing to improve some flow and operation on some of our bus service. And so as he was explaining it to me, it made total sense, but he himself said, but I know we can't really go with that. I'm all about my acronyms, and that's FLOP, and we can't go with that. And I was like, well, no, we can't. But it sounds like what you just said, because the word optimizing, that was the word. Optimizing was part of the FLOP piece of it. Optimize programming of something. And I was like, okay, so what you're telling me is you're just boosting the bus service. So we're going to call it Boost. You know, rather than focusing on your technical, this is really about boosting it. And Boost actually is an acronym for something else, and I can't remember what it was, and I created it. But at the end of the day, I think it was Bus Operations Optimized System Treatments. I think that's what it was. But we're never going to call it that. All we're doing is boosting the service, right? So you just want to make sure you have everyone in brainstorming and figure out, okay, what are the key things that we need to do to push this project along and letting people know? And then that's going to help you design and develop what should be your social media strategy. Okay, 3 months out, this is the element we really, really want to push. 2 months out, you want to have a timeline of when you want to do.
And my advice to you would be every single meeting that I'm in where we're talking about social media, or excuse me, marketing, I always ask the first question, what is your goal? What's the goal? I have to know, because if you don't tell me what your goal is, then I have absolutely no direction on where to point the marketing and the branding and the messaging. So knowing what your goal is paramount. And then for social media, my biggest advice is always finding someone who is extremely savvy with it, because it is an art. And those who do not know social media, like I was talking about authenticity, they're gonna be like, oh my gosh, a Gen Xer posted that one. You know, like my kids will be like, Mom, don't, no, that's a mom post. You can't post that. And to me, and here I am in the industry, right? But I know what my strengths are and I know what my weaknesses are. And for social media, I would definitely say make sure that the person who is doing it is media savvy, and then be creative with it, have fun. And that's the joy of social media. And I think that's where part of the juxtaposition that I talked about when this first started with transportation and media is that transportation is very buttoned up and social media is not. So I think you need to push the envelope a little bit there. And I mean, that sounds like a super fun event. So you should be able to have all kinds of video and sound bites and, people promoting it in their own words. And that people promoting a project or an event, gold. Whenever you can get somebody else saying how great your project is, post that all day.
I used to, in a former life when I was a reporter, I had a news director who used to always, his mantra was, put a face on every story. Put a face on every story. And so it really means about making sure it's the people telling it. One of our most popular posts at Metro have to do with our operators, and our operators sharing and telling their encounters, what they're experiencing. So we do that. We use operators and others a lot to be able to personalize and share stories.
What you're hearing is humanizing, bringing emotion to it, things that resonate, which I think in the world of transportation, when you're dealing with engineering types, that might be part of the reason why we get pushback, or when we walk in the room, they get really stiff because they don't want to talk to us. But clearly we're a bunch of communicators because we could talk all day. But I think for the branding for your event too, think about, definitely talk about what it means to the community, to the attendees, but what is your voice? What are the attributes that you want to represent? What are the characteristics? And that's what brings out the voice. Is it emotion? Is it casual? Is it, those are the kinds of things that you need to think through as you start to build that voice. Okay, we have a few more minutes. Oh, wait a minute. Or was this 120 minutes, not 90 minutes? Because we could be up here all day. Mark, how long is this? It's 90 minutes, right? Just kidding, everybody. You don't want to hang out with us all afternoon? Okay, other questions? Come on up. And then I saw a couple of movements in the front, so we can get to you next.
Everyone, thank you today. My name is Nick Arcos. I'm with Link Houston, so aware of Metro's works. But just a question, how y'all address communications to diverse communities, not just to English speakers, but the backbone of your transit services. How are you making sure that they're aware of what you're doing, and how would you advise us to do the same?
Sure. We're fortunate at Metro that that's paramount to our communications, because everything that we're putting out print-wise, collateral-wise, is in 4 languages, but we also have really stepped up our engagement with the Hispanic language, the Hispanic community, and focusing on a Facebook page that is dedicated to Spanish, and we have other platforms. We're doing Instagram in Spanish, and making sure that we're using those tools and those platforms to communicate with diverse communities, and also relying on the connections that we have. We have a Hispanic Advisory Council that we work with, and we share our information, and they help amplify it for us. So without question, you want to make sure that you're in that space and you're speaking to all audiences.
And of course, with public engagement, there's a lot of legalities, of course, that you have to do with that to get the translation out. But I'm working on a project now in Miami-Dade where we have to be very careful that we're translating into Cuban Spanish and not Mexican Spanish. So also knowing that, knowing the intricacies of what your diverse audience is so that you don't offend them. Be very, very cognizant of who it is. And with social media, if budget is a problem and you don't have an endless budget, who has an endless budget? You can always do the post more graphic if you feel that you have multiple languages in a community, and not do it so text heavy, more visual. concentrate more on the visuals, and then you can always do underneath in the post the different translations there. And that way you don't have multiple, that's better if you're able to have multiple pages, social media pages that you can monitor. But if that does not allow in your agency, you can always just put the different translations under one media post.
I think the other side of that, outside of language too, is when you understand equitable engagement, the number one rule is you have to go to them where they are. So regardless of who the audience is, and that might mean a council that advises you, that might mean community-based organizations that can advise you, the people that are there in that particular target audience community are your best partner in understanding what that means. Does it mean I'm tabling at the local farmers market to reach them? And maybe it's multiple languages, but that's where they are, so that's where we go instead of asking them to come to us. So that's just number one rule that's on top of language and other barriers.
One great thing that we are doing now, and it's been amazing, is instead of having some of our meetings at these community facilities, we're going to the local shopping, mom and pop shop store, or getting the agreements and participation that way. We've been very successful in going into a number of smaller establishments and being able to have that kind of engagement because the owners would allow us to. Can we come to this market and set up shop inside your store to share information? And we've been able to do that. So.
And one of the things that we used for public engagement when we were in the Northeast Georgia mountains, which is very rural, we were really having trouble getting public engagement. We couldn't get our numbers up. We couldn't get anybody to attend the meetings. And we got on the phone and started calling the Chamber of Commerce in all of the different areas. Our numbers tripled in a day. And then we decided, okay, well, wait, what do? We had to go to them. They go to church. So then we went to the churches and we would post, we made a graphic and we put it up on the church full screen before church for the announcements. And the engagement went from, I think, 7 people to over 300 in a week. So to your point, you have to go to where they are. So think outside the box. But the Chamber of Commerce is something that I just kind of keep in my back pocket because who knew, but it's small businesses and they're normally very much engaged in the community.
And I would also add that especially with minority communities and those where the language is other than English, they have local media outlets, radio stations, newspapers, which are often heavily patronized by that segment of the population.
Okay, we are at time. So we really, really appreciate you spending a little bit of your afternoon with us. It has been my pleasure and honor to be on stage with you all. We have learned a ton. I love the car/bus rapid transit video. That was my favorite. I couldn't wait for you to show that. So thank you so much, everyone, and we hope that you can take away a little something from today. Have a great rest of your conference.